What kind of woman chooses a blizzard over the life she knows? The question hangs in the dark like the weight of the sky, and out there, beneath the raw sweep of winter near Cheyenne, Emily Dawson presses forward because anything is better than turning back. The wind slashes across the open ground, carrying needles of ice that sting her cheeks and steal her breath. Snow swirls in wild circles, erasing the road, the horizon, even the memory of warmth. Her coat is thin, threadbare, meant more for work behind a bar than for the ruthless emptiness of the prairie. Each step feels wrong, like her body no longer belongs to her, like the cold is hollowing her out from the inside. But the thought of Victor Malone's voice, the way he said she belonged to him until the debt was paid, drives her on. Better to disappear under the snow than become a possession again. The storm roars. Her fingers are numb, turned to stone in her sleeves. Her breath breaks apart in ragged gasps. Emily stumbles, slows, then forces herself forward, because stopping means dying, and dying still feels like a choice she isn't ready to make. Yet the darkness keeps pressing closer. Her head feels light. Her legs buckle. The white ground tilts, and suddenly she's on her knees, the snow biting into her palms. She tries to rise, but her body refuses. For a moment, there is peace in the idea of letting go. The wind fades, the pain dulls, her eyes close. Silence. Then, footsteps. A voice cuts through the storm, firm, measured, carrying a note of surprise and something like concern. Thomas Callahan. Folks call him Tom, though few people come close enough to try. He lives alone out in the valley, a man whispered about more than he is known, a figure as weathered as the land itself. He comes across Emily's crumpled form like he's found a secret the snow meant to keep. He doesn't waste words. He checks for breath, for a pulse, for any sign of life. Then he lifts her into his arms. She weighs less than she should. She is limp, cold, nearly gone. He shields her body from the wind as best he can and heads for the cabin that waits like a lone heartbeat in the endless white. Inside, the fire is coaxed to life, the room blooming with orange light and the smell of burning pine. Tom works methodically. Wet boots off, frozen fingers uncurled, blankets layered over her, warm water readied. He doesn't shake her or shout. He knows the cold too well. It isn't a battle won with noise. He holds her hands between his, feeling the slow return of warmth, the faint tremor as sensation stirs again. From somewhere deep, a sound leaves her, half breath, half plea, and her eyelids flutter but do not open. Time stretches into a quiet vigil. Tom feeds the fire, spoons thin broth to her lips, keeps watch through the night while the storm claws at the walls. The cabin becomes a fragile world, small but stubborn against the wild outside. When morning edges in, gray and cautious, Emily is still breathing. Days pass, marked by the rhythm of firewood and soup and the hiss of boiling water. Emily wakes, then sleeps, waking a little longer each time. The first clear moment arrives with the firelight painting the ceiling and Tom sitting in a chair near the bed, quietly alert. She doesn't know where she is, only that she is warm, that someone has fought for her life when she had nearly surrendered it. Her voice is weak. His replies are simple. He doesn't press for details, doesn't ask about Victor or the debt or the bruises she still feels in memory. He gives her space and time because he understands that some stories can only be told when the fear has loosened its grip. When Emily can finally sit up without the room tilting, Tom makes his offer. If she has no place to go, she can stay a while. Help with cooking, keep the cabin, share the quiet. He makes it sound practical, straightforward, like any arrangement between two people who need to get through a winter. But there is something else there too, something unspoken. Respect. Choice. A kind of dignity she hasn't felt in years. Emily studies his face, the guarded kindness in his eyes. And she realizes this may be the first offer in a long time that doesn't cost her a part of herself. She accepts, still wary, still fragile, yet grateful down to the bone. Outside, the snow keeps falling, undisturbed. Inside, a new beginning waits. Small and uncertain, but real. The storm passed, but the quiet that followed felt almost louder. Days on the ranch fell into a rhythm that steadied Emily in ways she had forgotten were possible. Morning began with the soft scrape of Tom's boots as he stepped outside, his breath rising pale in the cold as he headed toward the barn. The air still carried winter's sharp edge, but inside the cabin there was always a fire, always the smell of coffee, always the sense that the world could be manageable if you faced it one task at a time. Emily moved carefully at first, still a guest in a life she didn't fully understand. She swept the wooden floor. She washed the tin dishes. She cooked meals that were simple but warm. Each act, small as it was, stitched her back into herself. Tom never hovered. He worked stock, repaired fencing, cut wood, all with the slow, steady care of someone who knows things last longer when you do them right. In the evenings, they shared the silence the way some people share conversation. Words came, but only when they mattered. She told him about books she used to read, about the way the sky looked over the town before dawn. He spoke about the land, the weather, the way a horse could sense your fear before you did. Sometimes they said nothing at all, letting the fire do the talking. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was safety first, trust slowly rising like the heat from the hearth. Emily noticed the small things. The way Tom set a second mug without asking if she wanted coffee. The way he paused before entering a room, giving her a moment to settle. The way he never touched her without need or warning. Respect was the air of the house. And in that air, hope began to grow roots. But hope never fully drowned out the echo of the past. At night, when the wind pressed against the cabin like a living thing, Emily would wake with the old fear clawing at her chest. She would hear Victor's voice again, the cold certainty when he said she owed him, when he said debts have consequences. She would see the bar, the smoke, the hands that gripped too tightly. Some nights she cried quietly, turning her face to the wall so the sound wouldn't travel. Some nights she sat at the table and watched the last embers fade, reminding herself she was here, not there. Tom never pried, but he noticed. He would put another log on the fire and sit nearby, not close enough to corner her, just close enough that she wasn't alone with the dark. The fragile piece held like glass under strain. Outside, the land began to shift. Snow pulled back from the edges of the fields. Streams cracked free of ice. The sky lifted a shade brighter. Life pushed forward, stubborn as ever. Emily stepped further from the cabin each day, learning the lines of the property, the sound of the river, the smell of pine warmed by afternoon sun. She started to laugh again, little bursts of sound that surprised her. With every laugh, the distance between her and her former life widened. Yet the thought of Victor lingered like a shadow you only notice when the light changes. She knew men like him didn't simply give up. His anger was a heavy thing, a tool, and he wielded it well. If there was profit in her return or pride to defend, he would try. The fear wasn't loud, but it was constant, moving under the surface of every calm day. Tom sensed it too. He kept his rifle cleaned. He watched the road without making a show of it. Not paranoia, just the quiet knowledge that the world didn't always respect boundaries. One afternoon, Emily stood outside the barn, sun warming her face, and understood something that startled her with its clarity. She wanted to stay, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this place, this quiet, this man, this life shaped by honest work, felt like a beginning rather than a hiding place. The realization filled her with joy and dread at the same time. Joy, because she'd finally found somewhere she could exist without bargaining for her dignity. Dread, because now there was something real to lose. That night they ate stew at the table, steam curling from the bowls, and the fire painted gold across the walls. Tom spoke about repairing the far fence line once the thaw finished. Emily listened, resting her hands against the warm wood of the table, and imagined a future where seasons rolled forward and she was still here. part of the pattern. It was almost enough to make her forget the danger trailing behind her. Almost. Days stretched, then folded, then disappeared entirely, the way time does when nothing dramatic happens. The fragile piece became a habit. They began to rely on it. And that was when the first hairline fractures appeared. It started with a feeling, a shift in the air, a sense that the world outside the ranch had remembered them. Then, one late afternoon, as the sky washed itself in lavender and the wind turned colder, Emily saw a distant speck on the road, moving slow but certain toward the valley. She didn't need to be told who it might be. Her heart tightened. The shadow she'd been waiting for had finally chosen a shape. The piece they'd built, so carefully and so quietly, suddenly felt like a house without a door. She stood still for a long time, the fading light brushing her face, and understood that the past was no longer content to remain behind them. And whatever came next would test not only her will to be free, but the fragile world she and Tom had begun to build together. The speck on the road grew larger, shaping itself into a rider wrapped in a dark coat, horse moving with the steady patience of someone who believes the place he is going already belongs to him. By the time the hoofbeats reached the yard, Emily had gone still, hands resting on the edge of the table as if bracing against a wave. Tom stepped out onto the porch, not rushing, not afraid, just present. He knew a man didn't ride this far without a purpose. Victor Malone swung down from his saddle with the slow confidence of a gambler who thinks the deck is marked in his favor. His boots hit the ground. His gaze found Emily through the open doorway, and a thin smile curved across his face, a smile that said the past had caught up. "There you are," he said, voice smooth, practiced, meant to sound reasonable. "You took off without saying goodbye. That's not how debt works." Emily didn't move. Her heart hammered, but she held herself steady, refusing to shrink. Tom didn't look back at her. His attention stayed on Victor, the way a man watches a rattlesnake, calm but ready. "State your business," Tom said, voice low, even. Victor's eyes flicked over Tom like he was measuring something. "Simple enough. She owes me. She works it off. She ran. Now I'm here to collect." He said it like he was discussing a lost horse, not a human being. Tom didn't argue the morality of it. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "She's not going anywhere with you." The air tightened. The wind picked up a curtain of dust and snow and dropped it again. Victor stepped closer, boots grinding on frozen earth, chin lifting in challenge. "You misunderstand," he said, and the smile vanished. "This isn't a choice. Papers or no papers, the law tends to favor the man who's owed money. You hand her over, and we don't have to make trouble." Emily could feel the edge of fear pressing into her ribs, but beneath it was something else, something steadier, the certainty that Tom wouldn't fold. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, like a man who knows what his strength is and doesn't need to display it. "There won't be trouble," he said, "as long as you leave." Victor's temper flashed, quick and ugly. "You think hiding her out here changes what she is? She's property until the debt is gone." The word property landed like a slap. Emily took a breath, the anger in her chest hot enough to cut through the cold. Tom's eyes hardened, just enough to be seen. "You'll choose your next words carefully," he said. Victor scoffed, but there was a flicker of caution now. He wasn't used to being resisted, not like this. Not by a man who didn't bluster or beg. He glanced again at the cabin, at the woman inside who no longer looked like a frightened girl, but like someone anchored to the floor by her own will. Control was slipping, and he felt it. "You don't know who you're crossing," Victor said. "This is business. It's legal. You're interfering." Tom didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm doing. You're trespassing, you're threatening, and you're done." The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt sharp. Victor's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked as if he might push it further, force his way past the porch and into the cabin, drag Emily out and dare Tom to stop him. But then he saw the surety in Tom's stance. The way the rifle inside the doorway wasn't a threat so much as a promise that no harm would pass this threshold without a price. And he hesitated. He spat into the dirt, more to break the moment than anything else. "You think this is over?" he said softly. "It's not. She owes me. The world may be wide, but not wide enough to hide a debt forever." Tom finally stepped down from the porch, closing the space between them just enough to make his point crystal clear. "Listen close," he said. "Whatever you think she owes, it ends here. You don't come back, you don't send men, you don't try again, because if you do, you'll regret the day you thought money gave you ownership over a human being." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply the truth, spoken by a man who had drawn a line in the sand. Victor held his gaze longer than was comfortable, looking for weakness and finding none. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He turned with a flick of his coat, mounted his horse, and cast one last look toward the woman standing in the shadow of the doorway. It wasn't affection. It wasn't regret. It was resentment, pure and unresolved. Then he rode away, the sound of hooves fading into the distance until the valley swallowed him whole. The yard fell quiet again. The sky stretched wide and pale overhead. Tom stood still for a long moment, making sure the silence was real. Emily stepped outside, the cold brushing her skin, relief and fear battling in her chest. "He'll be back," she said quietly. Tom didn't argue. "Maybe," he replied, "but so will we." It was a simple sentence, but it carried weight. It meant they would keep standing. They would keep choosing this fragile life, even if the past circled back like a wolf tracing old tracks. That night, the fire burned bright against the dark, and neither of them pretended the danger was gone. But something had shifted. Victor had come to claim ownership and left empty-handed. Emily had stayed. And in staying, she had begun to reclaim herself, one breath at a time, under the roof of a man who refused to see her as anything less than a person worth protecting. The days that followed took on the feel of borrowed time, as if the valley itself were holding its breath. Emily worked, cooked, swept, and tried to let the rhythm of ordinary life sink into her bones, yet a thin wire of tension hummed under every quiet moment. Tom didn't say much about it, but he checked the road more often, and the rifle stayed a little closer to the door. Spring pressed forward. The thaw deepened. Evenings lengthened into a softer light. It almost seemed possible that Victor Malone had decided the distance wasn't worth the fight. Then a horse appeared on the road again, this time with another beside it. Two riders casting long shadows across the yard as the sun dropped lower. Emily watched from the window, the breath leaving her lungs in a single tight exhale. She recognized the set of Victor's shoulders before she saw his face. Beside him rode a man in a deputy's badge, stiff in the saddle, the kind of lawman who leaned more on authority than on conscience. They reined in near the porch, dust curling around the horse's hooves. Tom stepped out, calm, steady, the way he had before. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't invite them in. He just waited. Victor spoke first, that same thin smile back on his lips. "I told you this wasn't over," he said. "Deputy Harris here has taken an interest in the matter. We've got papers, signed and witnessed, proving she owes me service until the debt is repaid. You're harboring her. That's a problem." Deputy Ethan Harris cleared his throat, glancing between the two men like he'd rehearsed this but wasn't quite sure of the lines. "It's a lawful agreement," he said. "She ran out on it. I'm here to see it honored." Tom didn't look at the papers right away. "She's a person," he said quietly, "not a contract." Victor lifted the folded document with a flourish, as if the ink itself granted him moral high ground. "Law doesn't much care for feelings," he replied. "She signed. She owes. You hand her over, and we all get to go home." Emily stepped out of the doorway then, not because she wasn't afraid, but because hiding would only feed the lie. The cool air hit her face. She stood beside Tom, not behind him. Victor's gaze slid toward her, appraising, condescending. "Emily," he said, like a man scolding a child, "let's stop pretending. You knew what you owed when you walked away. For a beat, everything inside her trembled the way it always had when he spoke like that. But something in her had changed. She had lived inside safety long enough to recognize the shape of control, and she was done being small. "I knew what you wanted me to believe," she said, voice steady. "Not what was right." Deputy Harris shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable with the direction this was going. "Ma'am," he said, "this isn't about right or wrong. It's about enforcing what's written." Emily met his eyes. "Then read it out loud," she said. "Explain how a woman becomes property in writing. Explain how a debt turns into ownership. Explain it slowly so we can all hear what you're calling justice." The deputy hesitated. Victor frowned as if the script had gone off track. Tom finally took the papers, looked them over, and handed them back. "These are trash," he said. "Witnesses that work for you. Terms that change whenever you say they do. You're dressing coercion up like a contract and hoping the badge will make it respectable." Deputy Harris flushed, but he didn't draw his gun. He didn't threaten. He just sat there, pinned between the pull of his position and the weight of what he was being asked to enforce. "I don't want trouble," he muttered. "Then don't make any," Tom replied. "You're standing on private land, trying to drag a woman off it with no lawful right. That's trouble." Victor's patience snapped. "You really think you can stand there and decide what's lawful?" he hissed. "Money changes hands. Papers get signed. That's the world." "Not this part of it," Tom said. The quiet certainty in his voice did what anger could not. It drew a line no one else could cross for him. Emily stood straighter, the fear loosening its grip one breath at a time. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't pleading. She was simply present, a living contradiction to the idea that she could be owned. "Deputy," she said, gentler now, "if you force me back, you're calling it law. But if you look at me and see a person who chose to leave abuse, then you have to decide whether law should be used to chain me to it. If you still take me, fine. But know what you're doing." The words landed. Harris swallowed, eyes dropping to the makeshift contract again. His silence stretched until it became an answer. "I'm not dragging a woman off this property," he said at last. "Not today." Victor's head snapped toward him. "You coward," he spat. "You think this ends because you don't have the stomach for it? I'll find another way." Tom took one measured step forward, his presence filling the space between Emily and the men who had come to reduce her to paper. "There is no other way," he said. "You're done coming here. You're done chasing her. If you keep pushing, you'll find out exactly how much you've misjudged this valley." Victor stared at him, rage and calculation clashing behind his eyes. He looked at Emily one last time, as if trying to bend her from afar with the force of his will. When she didn't break, when she didn't even look away, something inside him twisted. He jerked the reins, turned his horse sharply, and rode off with Deputy Harris trailing behind, leaving the air heavy with everything they hadn't said. The yard went still. Emily's shoulders dropped, the weight sliding off with a shudder she couldn't stop. Tom didn't reach for her right away. He gave her space, the same way he always had. Then he spoke softly. "You stood your ground," he said. "That matters." She nodded, blinking hard against tears that weren't only fear, but something warmer, something like relief. The confrontation hadn't just defended her freedom. It had rewritten the story she'd been told about herself. She wasn't property. She wasn't trapped. She was a woman who had chosen, and who'd been chosen in return by a man who valued her dignity more than his own ease. That night the fire burned steady, and the silence they shared was no longer weighted by dread, but knit together with gratitude, loyalty, and a bond that had been tested and held. The danger wasn't gone, not completely, but the worst lie had been broken in two, and in that fracture something true had room to grow. The valley settled into a quieter season after Victor's last visit, as if the land itself had decided to loosen its grip on tension. The shadows lengthened each evening, gentle instead of threatening, and the cabin became more than a refuge. It became a place where life gathered and stayed. Emily rose early to the sound of Tom moving outside, the low murmur of his voice calming the horses, the scrape of a shovel, the steady rhythm of someone who had made peace with work. She found a steadiness in those sounds. They were ordinary, yet every day they reminded her she was no longer living at the mercy of someone else's anger. She belonged to herself here, and she chose to share the life she had found. The nights deepened into a kind of peace she had never known. They talked more now, without the edge of fear skimming every word. Sometimes Tom would sit at the table, fingers wrapped around a mug, and tell her about the years he'd spent drifting after the people he loved were gone, how silence had become easier than company. Emily listened with the patience born from her own scars. Their stories were different, but the ache beneath them was familiar. Loss, loneliness, the long road back from being unseen. Trust stitched them closer, not with drama or grand speeches, but with the quiet certainty that the other would stay. It happened one night when the wind was soft and the fire burned low, the cabin wrapped in a hush that felt almost sacred. Emily sat across from Tom, watching the flames move like small ghosts across the logs, and she felt the truth of her heart settle fully into place. She wasn't merely grateful. She wasn't simply safe. She loved him. The realization didn't crash in like a storm. It arrived like dawn, slow and inevitable. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with the weight of something honest that finally demanded to be spoken. She lifted her gaze and found him watching the fire as if it were the only thing left to do after a long day. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "Tom," she said, and he looked up, patient as ever. "I don't want to just stay here. I don't want to just be someone you helped once. I don't want to keep running or pretending I'm temporary." The words gathered strength as they left her. "I love you. If you'll have me, I want to be your wife. Not because I owe you anything, not because I need somewhere to hide, because this, us, feels like the life I was meant to find." For a long heartbeat, the room fell utterly still. Tom didn't rush to answer. He studied her face, not like a man searching for flaws, but like someone trying to hold the truth carefully enough not to break it. He set the mug down, lines of weariness and hard years tracing his features. "Emily," he said softly, and there was a tremor in his voice she had never heard before. "I'm not a young man. I've made my peace with being alone. I don't have much to give except work and whatever heart I've got left. I'd never want you to feel like you settled for less than you deserve." She shook her head before he'd even finished. "You don't get to decide what I deserve," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "I choose you. That's the whole point." Something in him gave way, not to weakness, but to hope. He reached across the table slowly, carefully, as if still giving her every chance to change her mind. When her hand met his, the grip was warm, steady, grounding. "Then I promise you this," he said. "Whatever I have, whatever I am, it's yours, for as long as you want it." There was no orchestra, no crowd to witness it. Just two people who had survived enough to recognize the rare gift of choosing and being chosen. They arranged a wedding that matched the life they lived. Simple, honest, unadorned. A preacher came up from town. Two neighbors stood as witnesses, awkward in their Sunday coats. The sky stretched impossibly wide above them, blue and endless, as they spoke the words that sealed their lives together. Emily wore a plain dress, nothing more, yet she carried herself like someone who had finally stepped into her own name. Tom stood beside her, shoulders squared, eyes steady, and when he took her hands, every mile of loneliness he had walked seemed to fall away. Married life did not transform the world. The ranch still demanded long days and steady effort. The wind still swept the valley clean each night. But something inside the cabin changed. Laughter came easier. Silence felt fuller. Emily moved through the rooms with a sense of ownership, not of things, but of the life beating quietly within those walls. Tom, once so contained, allowed warmth to surface in small gestures, a hand resting briefly at the small of her back, a smile that started slowly and stayed. Sometimes Emily would stand on the porch at dusk, watching the light fade over the hills, and think about the girl who had stumbled into a blizzard believing that death might be the only escape left. That girl had been hollowed out by fear, convinced that her worth could be tallied up in debts and hours worked. Now she knew better. She knew that freedom wasn't only the absence of chains. It was the presence of someone who refused to see you as anything less than fully human. Victor Malone faded into the distance like a bad dream you eventually stopped telling. No more deputies came. No more threats arrived. The threat had never only been him. It had been the lie he represented. The lie that said some lives could be owned. That lie no longer had a home in her. Seasons turned. Snow returned, but it came differently now. Softer in memory, quieter in the heart. When winter settled again around the cabin, Emily and Tom sat by the fire like they had before, but there was a ring of gold around the ordinary moments. They belonged to a story not of rescue alone, but of renewal. Two people building something steady from the broken edges of what came before. In the hush of those nights, with the world reduced to wind and flame and the ticking of the stove, they did not speak much about the past. They didn't need to. It was enough to know they had stepped through it and found each other waiting on the other side. Slowly, as the story draws to a close, the light fades across the valley, and the sound of the wind softens into a distant sigh. Emily and Tom remain there, calm and steady, wrapped in the warmth of the small cabin they call home. Their journey has been long, marked by storms, shadows, and fear, yet it led them not to grand triumph, but to something gentler and more enduring. They learned that love can arrive late and quiet, that dignity can be reclaimed, and that a human heart, once broken, can still choose trust again. So the final image softens, edges blurring like snow falling at dusk. Two figures sit beside a fire, hands barely touching, sharing the simple peace they once thought they would never find. And with that calm, the story releases its last breath, whispering that no matter how dark the road may seem, there is always a place where the door opens, the light glows warm, and the long night finally rests. End of article. Good night.